and welcome to all of you in this digital format. Whatever a welcome to the digital format means. I'm glad you're here, very glad. So in this series, we're asking what I think is the critical question of our times: what is a human? And last week, we got a view of that from the inside, if you like, by thinking about human consciousness, our self-sense, our self-awareness. Now tonight, we're going to take a different place and take a look at us from the outside. If it were possible for you and I to stand outside of our species, my question is, what would we observe in terms of what a human is? Or perhaps we could conceive of our endeavor tonight like this: if an extraterrestrial creature came to Earth and observed us as human beings, what would they see? I've got a picture of one for you. You can call her or him what you want. Here's the visitor come to planet Earth to observe us. What would stand out about us for this creature? And I think it could well be, and it'd be many things, of course, but it could well be the sheer range of things that humans are capable of, what we might call our capacities or our faculties, and the various outcomes that flow from them. Humans, in many ways, are like an onion. There's so many layers to us in terms of what we can do. And to just stand back and to observe our human capacities, I think should move us to wonder. It's part of the enchantment to say, oh, look at what we're capable of. As the great William Shakespeare put it in a speech in Hamlet, what a piece of work is man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty. A lovely description. So I want to list the standout faculties I think an alien would be likely to register as they observed us. And I think each of these are quite fundamental to who and what we are, and a key aspect of what I'm going to call the enchantment account of what we are. So let me list them, and then we're going to actually go through them, starting from the bottom up. Feeling capacity, language capacity, a capacity for rationality. We're able to act on the world. We're sociable creatures. We have that capacity. We have a capacity for property, a remarkable capacity for beauty and an appreciation of it. We have a moral capacity. We have a capacity to love. And then we have a religious capacity. So those are the 10 that I want to call a dappled anthropology. And I love this term because I think there are so many facets to us. And each of these that I'm going to work through tonight briefly are a distinct domain. They stand on their own, and yet, of course, we're a unity, and all of these things are in play together. And I take this approach because I feel today we're so reductionistic in terms of what a human is. We tend to lose Shakespeare's view of how infinite we are in faculty. We tend to reduce what we are either to the brain, we talked about that in my first talk, what I call the hardware account, or to our social conditioning, I call that the software account. It seems today we're on the search for what Roger Trigg calls a spurious simplicity when it comes to describing us. And I think when we do that, we miss the big picture. So that's what I'm trying to do tonight, is to give the big picture of what a human is by means of looking at our faculties. So we have these dappled faculties and capacities, and I'm just going to paint each one of them with very broad brushstrokes and try to paint a portrait. And we could spend a long time on each one. Each one deserves a lecture, but I want to put them together as we stand back and view ourselves from the outside. And without getting into too much detail here, there's a certain anticipation in terms of how I present them. From the bottom up, the one feeling gives rise to the possibility of language. So there's a certain order here and yet a wonderful harmony. So lots to get through. I'm going to do it fairly quickly just to give this portrait of what we are. So firstly, our wondrous capacity for feeling. Our wondrous capacity for feeling. Human receptivity to the world external to us begins in feeling. And there are two dimensions to human feeling. The first we call sensations, or the sensate, which begin as physical stimuli in the body, and is directly tied to our biology. This is the automatic response mechanism to what's happening outside of us. So if you're in a field and you're being chased down by a bull, you're going to have a pit in your stomach and perhaps a loosening of your sphincter, and that's going to emote you to move, and to move as quickly as you can. It's all automatic. Now, it's interesting, neuroscientists construct patterns of how this works, and it looks very similar for humans and animals. It's feeling as something which is instinctive. It's an instinct, and it's utterly necessary for our survival. Anyone lacking the capacity of the sensate isn't going to live very long. So the feeling of fear we need to make us respond to certain things external to us. The second dimension of feeling is what the French call sentiment, which is a much more complex level of feeling. And sentiment is really the doorway between the without, what's in our bodies, and the within, this consciousness that we looked at last week. And that's why sentiment is sometimes called the language of the soul. And there's something about this kind of feeling that goes so deep, it can even be hidden from ourselves. This is, of course, Freudian denial. But the fact is, it's in the realm of consciousness, and we can hide it. And we can also hide it from others. One can have suicidal thoughts and feelings and present themselves to others as cheerful. Now, you could never do that with a sensation, say, of raw fear, which is going to be written in your face and in the tenseness of your body. We can hide sentiment. So humans are capable of such depths of this kind of feeling. We can be gripped by a sorrow that weighs us down. We talk about the heavy heart. At times feeling weightier than the world itself. That's the language of our soul at that point. Or on the other side, the elation of joy, of ecstasy. It's like Jimmy Stewart in the remarkable film, It's a Wonderful Life, who, when he fell in love, says, I feel like I could throw a lasso around the moon. That was his elation. I could bring the moon down. So weighty was his ecstasy and joy at that moment. And I believe our capacity for this kind of feeling sets us apart. We're capable as human beings of feeling the weight of existence, going beyond atoms and cells. And this dimension of feeling maps onto a reality that has a great fullness to it. And I would suggest the more attuned we are to these depths of our inner feeling, the more alive we are. So that's our wondrous capacity for feeling. Then we move on to our wondrous capacity for language. I think our alien friend would observe us and immediately be struck by the fact that we're language animals. And they'd note that here we stand out from other species of animals. Richard David Precht puts it like this: the most striking and significant difference in comparing man and ape is obviously human language. No one seriously disputes that apes use a complex system of sounds to communicate. Apes also have Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe, which is linked to understanding words, and Broca's area in the prefrontal cortex, which is used to produce language and grammar. But why, he asks, aren't they able to use a sophisticated oral language to communicate the way humans do? This is the significant difference. They can't do it. Now, this fact that we're speakers, speech users, is a fundamental aspect of our human experience. And I think it's the basis for so much else of what we're capable of. Madeleine Mengel said this: we think because we have words, not the other way around. And the more words we have, the better able we are to think conceptually. In his remarkable book, The Arc of Speech, the contemporary French philosopher Jean-Louis Chrétien shows how the universe is liberated into its being for us because of speech. So it's because of words that the meaning of the world emerges, like in an arc. And you can see this with a toddler who begins to use words. I sometimes observe that every word that they gain doubles the size of their universe. As Wittgenstein put it, philosopher of language, the limits of my language means the limits of my worlds. It describes it well. Now, our endeavors today to understand how and why humans have this special language capacity is nowhere near the finish line. How is it that humans come to be in possession of language? So many questions about this. What did it emerge from? I thought this was quite good. The emergence of language, a couple. We need to talk. Well, possibly. But where did it come from? Now, that's a too big a question for us to take on tonight, but it's interesting looking at how others have tried to do this. Wittgenstein, again, rooted language in logic. In his early career, he viewed language with the eyes of a technician. He thought words corresponded to the things of this world, and their juxtaposition endued it with meaning. So if words agree with things and there's an alignment there, then he thought a proposition is true. But of course, language, as we all know, is full of ambiguity. Just yesterday, I attended a funeral in the north of England, just outside of Bradford, and I said to my children, it's a filthy day. Now, did that phrase refer to the fact that it was gray and miserable and rainy outside, or it's a filthy day? Did it refer to the fact that my inner mood was sober in the face of death? The ambiguity of language, it could go either way. There is no one-to-one correspondence. And part of the complexity and wonder of speech is its nuance. And that's why you can't reduce speech to a simple true-false. It's more like, is speech successful in terms of its intended use or unsuccessful? And that's the most important function, to understand and to be understood. Now, though language is indeterminate, it works remarkably well. And anyone who's honest, I think, has to acknowledge that. And that's why in his posthumous book, Wittgenstein changed his mind in the book called Philosophical Investigations. He relinquished the idea that language can be grasped solely by means of logic. He saw that the context for language, the community in which it took place, wasn't as important as its grammar. Now, it's interesting that in terms of accounting for this language ability, Noam Chomsky, one of the great philosophers on language, been doing it for a long time, he believes humans are simply born with an innate sense of language and grammar. And he argues we have this natural aptitude for it. Toddlers learn their first words virtually automatically. And it grows within them, he said, in a manner resembling the growth of their arms and legs. And this is really astonishing. Language is staggeringly complex in terms of its grammar and syntax, and there's just no explanation for how a young child acquires it so easily. They couldn't get the basic rudiments of mathematics, yet they get language. And I think that begins to hint that actually we were created with this wondrous capacity. Then next is our wondrous capacity for rationality. And clearly this is a standout feature, one that's been prized for millennium. And this is what Shakespeare highlights in his "What a piece of work is man" speech. How noble his reason, he adds. And it's interesting, as philosophy has wrestled with what a human is through the ages, this was seen as our special capacity. For some, this is what perfected us. As Immanuel Kant wrote in his Critique of Pure Reason, there's nothing higher than reason. No, I don't want to get into the rights or wrongs in that. And I want to say this, there's no doubting that other animals are clever. Animals are clearly capable of some form of deduction. Years ago, we had a dog who used to get what we call the Sunday blues, because on Sunday we disappear from the house for most of the day and wake up in the morning, look at Harvey, and he had the Sunday blues. So animals can be very clever, but humans clearly take it to another level. We have an unparalleled intellect, and that still remains the enigma. Why? Now, it's interesting, against this clear history and affirmation of the importance of our reason, over the last 150 years, our special status as having an unparalleled intellect has been seriously questioned, especially in philosophy. And I think it's one of the most troubling things about modern anthropologies. Many of them tend to undermine, in various ways, the wonder of reason. Now, this actually starts with Nietzsche, the German philosopher. He mounts one of the first challenges to the idea that we're extra special because of reason. He thought philosophers were wrong to regard humans like that. His thinking went like that: if God is dead, our thinking faculties must be flawed because it's just a product of nature. So we may think that we're exclusive in our clever animal status, but for Nietzsche, we're mere animals, and that means our thinking is determined by all that animality implies. Like animals, we have drives and instincts and a primitive will and a limited intellect, he said. And just like any other animal, humans model the world on what their senses enable them to understand. So reason is just rooted in the sensory. But I think a little reflection shows that our capacity for thought is not totally dependent on our senses. We're capable of humans of thinking about things that don't even exist. Lots of people today think a lot about the Loch Ness Monster, a fictional creature that doesn't exist. Now, it's our capacity for rationality that actually enables us to break out of the world of the sensory. And I'm thinking specifically here about our capacity for abstractions. We can create theories and abstractions endlessly. And when we do that, we break out a piece of reality, we make it distinct from the whole, and we create a world out of it. This is a picture that reflects what we do when we abstract. We create models of things. Now, our ability here is truly a wonder, because we can create visions of the world beyond the sensory. So our ability to create theories and abstractions is the basis for so much of our human life. From bridge building to designing internal combustion engines to the miracle of electricity to the invention of the computer, all of these began in theory and abstraction. Now, because our rational faculties have this breakout dimension, thought, rationality, is not part of the interlocking system of nature, because you can break it out. And this was a key insight for C.S. Lewis. And actually seeing this point, that reason, rationality, is not part of the interlocking system of nature, you can break it out, that was for him the Rubicon. Once he crossed over that, he could no longer be a materialist. There had to be more to reality than the material because of the nature of reason. And I think there's very good reason to see our powers of rationality as a doorway to theism. And I would say, as a Christian, that we have rational faculties because they were endowed on us by an intelligent being. That is why we can think like we do. Our wondrous capacity for rationality. The fourth one is our wondrous capacity for action. Now, on this matter, the alien visitor would take note of our remarkable freedom. They'd look at us and say, they have choices, and those choices make a difference. This is a huge theme in Steinbeck's East of Eden, in my opinion, the greatest novel written, and this is a well-known passage from that book. But the Hebrew word, the word timshel, thou mayest, it's that gives a choice. It might be the most important word in the world. That says the way is open. That throws it right back in a man. For if thou mayest, it is also true that thou mayest not. Timshel, thou mayest. Now, this capacity for choice, for action, gives humans an astonishing capacity to act upon the world. We can act on nature and change it because of our choices. We're not just carried along by nature's laws like sticks on the current of a fast-flowing river. And it's that allows us to mark the world, to leave our signature on it. So we can take a plot of land that's covered in trees. That's how nature has left it. We can clear those trees, take the roots out. We can fence what we've cleared. And we can plant grains in one bit and keep livestock in another. And we can build a house on it. And then we can turn it into a village, and the village may become a town, and the town may become a city. Now, nothing in nature is capable of doing that, of acting upon the world, on nature, and leaving it different. Now, we're capable of that kind of action because humans can form intentions. Philosophers call this intentionality. Intentionality is future-directed thoughts. And a future-directed thought is then something you act upon, and those two are the will, the act, the future-directed thought that you act upon. It's a marvelous capacity. Now, today, this capacity is under serious review. And the argument goes like this. If humans are mere biology, then surely everything about us must be ordered by the laws of nature. So last week, we saw those who think the self is an illusion. And those are the kind of thinkers that say, if the self was illusion, then certainly so is the freedom that we delude ourselves into thinking we possess. Now, this is known in philosophical circles as determinism. There's different kinds of determinism. But basically, the idea is that everything is locked in and there's no real freedom. Now, Thomas Ligotti rightly asked this question: can one really believe in determinism without going insane? It's a very, very pertinent question. Can one really believe in determinism, that there is no freedom to act without going insane? No human can bear the thought that we're just sticks floating on the current. But the question remains, is our freedom real? Our freedom to act? And I would suggest all the evidence says yes. And for me, it's culture, human culture, which is our signature that we leave by our actions, and history, which is the story of culture that affirms that our freedom is real. If nature were left to her own devices, there would be no culture. All we'd have is wilderness, the wilds. I remember years ago flying over a huge tract of Africa as I was flying to the southern tip. And you'd fly over a bit of it and you'd say, that's nature. Every sign of what I'm looking at out of this window is nature. It's wilderness. And then culture. There's fields, there's shape, there's outline. And the difference between the two was so striking. Now, that's possible because of human action. Now, it's interesting. If materialism or naturalism weights the matter of our freedom towards determinism, the cultural consensus today actually goes in the other direction, partly because, as Ligotti says, no one can really believe in this without going insane. And actually, today we champion human freedom like nothing else. The 20th century existential philosophers strongly weighted their account of what a human was to freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre put it like this: we are our choices. For him, there's no human nature, no essence to us. All we are is existence, which is premised in choices and a freedom to choose. That pre-exists any essence we have. It's interesting, Rousseau, a French philosopher who's really one of the architects of the modern world, for him, human liberty of action was central. It was a key insight for him. When he looked at animals, he said, they're creatures guided by instinct, and they're not capable of change. They never deviate from the norm. So a lion never becomes a herbivore, but humans can become vegetarians. And we can change lots of things about our behavior over the course of a lifetime and change ourselves in that, both for good and for bad. Why? Rousseau asked, because we have liberty of action, freedom of choice. So however we account for it, this is one of our wondrous capacities. I think it's a standout, and an alien would pick this up immediately. The fifth capacity I want to mention is our wondrous capacity for sociability. Sociability. I think aliens would observe, just as Aristotle did, that man is by nature a social animal. This is something written in. Now, of course, we as humans are not alone in this. There's lots of other herd animals that are very social. You think of the vast schools of herring that live in our oceans, or the elk that roam around northern Canada in numbers almost too vast to count. And then among the more than 200 species of apes, not a single one lives in complete isolation. So other animals are social too. But there's something about human sociability that's unique. And it's these unique factors that make it a wondrous capacity. And one of them is that the purpose of our sociability is clearly for more than biological survival. It's not like the elk in huge herds. It's a way of fending off predators, keeping safe. Our sociability goes further than that. I would suggest it's actually intrinsic to our well-being, to our internal life, to our self-sense. We need others. And actually, even our self-sense is a lot of it gained from the group we belong to. I am English. I am Canadian. I am from Cambridge. I belong to this football club. These are important parts of our self-sense, the group we're part of. As John Updike writes, we take our bearings daily from others. To be sane is, to a great extent, he says, to be sociable. And I would say this issue of sanity gets right to the point. Our internal mental health is largely dependent on this social side of our existence. And that's why lockdown measures in terms of COVID-19 is a two-way street. Lockdown may protect our biology from the deadly virus, but at the same time, it's deeply damaging to our within, to this social capacity that we have, because we are by nature social animals. Now, another unique factor about human sociability is the sheer range of alliances that we can make. And sociology is a relatively new discipline that looks at this and tries to wrap its head around it. Our collaborative flexibility is astonishing, and it goes so far beyond the herd instincts of animals. Think how many groupings and memberships are in our leisure and hobby activity on a basis of an interest. Perhaps you're a detectorist. Helen and I have just watched The Detectorist, this wonderful BBC program about a group of metal detectors. This is what brings this group together. And in this country, we have rambling clubs that walk through our lovely countryside. We've got birding clubs, we've got train spotting clubs, golfing clubs, lawn bowls club. We could keep naming the various clubs we belong to for hours. This is the range of our alliances. And we exist, all of us, in multiple social domains. We have memberships in lots of different social groups. And we can even suspend one momentarily for another. You might be an ardent Labour supporter politically, but you're also a Chelsea supporter, many of whom happen to be conservative. But in that group, it doesn't matter. So our capacity for sociability is just astonishing. And one says, well, why are we like this? And that, again, is a question that neurobiology is probing. They're trying to find the link in the brain. There are theories around sociability founded today on the idea of exchange. In biology, you can see how plants function with the exchange of nutrients. And then within families, there's this exchange of genes that create the pool, the group. But of course, our sociability functions with exchanges that go way beyond biology. With nations, it's the exchange of language. Football clubs, an exchange of color and history. So many things to account for our sociability. And so whatever does account for it, I'm just saying it's a wonderful capacity, and it adds such richness to our life. Okay, that's 5 down, 5 to go. The sixth one is our wondrous capacity for property, Now, property, by property, I mean a thing. It could be an iPhone or a car or a jumper. We have a capacity for these things. But if an alien observed property in the hands of humans, they'd be struck by something. Humans are capable of possessing property. We own it. It's ours. It's taken into ourself. And this is something Sir William Blackstone observed way back in 1766. This was in the second volume of his famous Commentaries on the Laws of England. And he said, "There is nothing which so generally strikes the imagination and engages the affections of mankind as the right of property." This goes very deeply to the core of what we are. And the fact that property engages our affection and gives sense to rights. This is mine. I own it. Puts this capacity into another realm. This is now in the personal realm. And the fact that this iPhone belongs to me means that in some way it's actually absorbed to myself. It's mine. And it becomes, in a strange way, part of me. Think of our clothes. We love our clothes. They become part of us. So the significance of property lies in the fact that it releases certain emotions and impulses of our inner life. And it allows for our egos to extend into it. So we identify some part of ourselves with property, the property we possess. Now, I'd say today we've taken this to a point that no other point in history ever has. We're so defined by the car we drive and the clothes we wear. I think it's got out of hand. But still, it's a wonderful capacity. It shows something wonderful in terms of what we can do. And of course, the fact that we have this capacity means that we can bargain with what we own. Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, philosopher, said this: "Man is an animal that makes bargains. No other animal does this. No dog exchanges bones with another." And because we can make bargains with what belongs to us, it has to be done with care, market transaction, with contracts, creating equilibriums as we pay some money and take the possession of another. But it has to be done carefully because of our capacity for property. And I think an alien would also notice that with our capacity for property is the ability of fecundity. We have this remarkable ability to handle the stuff of this world and to make it grow. Think again of real estate as property. You clear the land, you work the soil, you put in seed, and you create abundance. It's about increasing the bounty of nature, and you give it an abundance that nature could never do on its own. We have this ability in terms of property. Our seventh capacity, our wondrous capacity for beauty. Now, I have to restrain myself here. This is something that matters a great deal to me. What can we say briefly? Well, we live as humans in a natural habitat that is full of beauty. We live in a beautiful world. As Emily Dickinson said, beauty isn't caused, it is. And Rumi, the great Rumi, beauty surrounds us. We are surrounded by beauty because we live in a beautiful world. And there's something about us that is capable of having an awareness of beauty. And I think an alien would be struck by that. An awareness that's moved by beauty. I remember the first time I saw this scene, this exact scene in the Rocky Mountains. And I had an experience in seeing that, almost exactly that vantage point of what the philosophers call the sublime. And it actually haunts me to this day occasionally in my dreams, because I try to go back and find it again, because I was so moved by it. Now, when we're moved by beauty, by the sublime, we're doing that because we're in the presence of something truly awesome. It takes our breath away. And there's a hint in this kind of experience of something beyond nature. There's an elusive hidden dimension that ripples through. A realm that has what Lewis called a supra-nature dimension. And it's the hints of these that are then the inspirations for our artistic creations. We are moved by beauty because it surrounds us, and we attempt to bring it out of hiding by painting, through composition of music, or through poems, as Lewis wrote. For supranature, we require poetics. We have to have it to try and bring it out of hiding a bit. And that's the capacity of our human imagination. We can be moved by it, then we can create it, the masterpiece of a Vincent van Gogh painting. Now, as humans with this capacity, we engage beauty not for any benefit to our biology. And this is where the idea of the disinterested really comes into its own. Oscar Wilde wittily said, "All art is absolutely useless." And he meant useless in terms of its function for the body. Art is rather about drawing out the soul. It's about enlarging our inner life. As Goethe, the great German playwright and philosopher, put it, he said, "A man or a woman should hear a little music, read a little poetry, and see a fine picture every day of his life, in order that worldly cares may not obliterate the sense of the beautiful which God has implanted in the human soul." That's the capacity we have. And this capacity really is a wonder. And I think in a world that grows increasingly ugly, we should lean against explaining away this aspect of our dappled anthropology. As Dostoevsky said in The Idiot, beauty will save the world. The eighth one is our wondrous capacity for morality. It's interesting. We hear in the news today about disorder on the streets of some American cities, Philadelphia at the moment. But I would say with all of that, there is an order on the streets of our towns and cities that you would never find in the jungle. The law of the city is quite different from the law of the jungle. And for the vast majority, we can go out into our towns and our cities and not fear for our lives. You can't do that in the jungle. Now, I think an alien would no doubt be struck by that. And the question would be, why is this the case? And I would suggest that it's because humans operate according to a different law and order than nature does. It reminds us of Tennyson's famous phrase, "Nature red in tooth and claw." Nature works by the survival of the fittest, which means billions upon billions of organisms have a single mission: to assert their genetic makeup against all others to the detriment, suffering, or even the death of others. The law of the jungle. And the law of the jungle has no awareness of morals. As a number have said, the universe doesn't understand morals, but humans do, and they do very deeply. And they're possessed of what Francis Schaeffer called moral motions. Everyone is born with this sense of good and evil. And there's inbuilt norms that govern our behavior. Now, traditionally, this has been called the conscience, literally meaning with knowledge of a moral standard. And that's why all of us have this awareness of what is right and what's wrong. It's not instilled in us, firstly, either by religion or our parents or judicial system. It's like the baby emerges into the world with a sense of morality, which is why all of us, and even criminals, can instantaneously tell right from wrong. We have this capacity. And when the standards and norms that go with morality are contravened, our awareness immediately kicks in and we exclaim, "It's not fair." Those of you who have young children, listen for that, how many times that comes out in a day as your children play together. A norm is contravened, it's not fair. And at that moment, we seek redress. We want correction. We have to restore equilibrium in terms of moral balance. Now, this capacity accounts for so much of our responses to life. And it raises questions. Where does it come from? Is there a center for morality in the brain? And there's work today to see where that is. We're told that neurochemicals play their part in morality. When we do good things, we feel good. And when we do bad things, we feel bad. As Hemingway said in Death in the Afternoon, "So far about morals, I know only that what is moral is what you feel good after, and what is immoral is what you feel bad after." And there's some truth to that. And then the question is, are we naturally good or naturally bad? There's Homer could go either way with him. Rousseau, back to him, he was convinced that humans were good by nature, his idea of the noble savage. And he explains the rise of evil in us as something society is responsible for. It's a hint of this modern software idea. We're conditioned in terms of our morality by bad society, but innately we're good. That was his idea. Other modern thinkers have thought we're naturally bad. Thomas Henry Huxley, he's a close friend of Darwin, and he gave a lecture in Oxford to a packed auditorium in 1893. And the title of his lecture was Evolution and Ethics. And Huxley makes clear in this lecture that Rousseau's innate goodness is total nonsense. He says animals and humans can't be good by nature because nature itself isn't good. It is indifferent to goodness, and he actually said it's rather cruel. So then Huxley tries to explore where the ethical progress of society comes from. If there's nothing good in man by nature, how is it possible to come to a well-regulated moral society? And where does this morality come from if it doesn't come from human nature? And if humans aren't moral by nature, why does he have this capacity to act morally? Now, Huxley's an atheist, so he's not going to find his questions answered in the reality of God. But he poses the questions. And this moral question keeps rattling on. And there's more questions than ever. But as the debate goes on, where does morality come from? The brain, is it conditioned by society? Each of us carry on with this moral capacity. And I would say, thank God we do. Because we don't have to live by the law of the jungle. This is innate in us. And we have these moral motions as conscious, and that creates something in society which is good. And as a believer, I would say the inference of the best explanation why we're endowed with morality is God himself, a personal God with a perfect character who sets the norms for what is good and what is evil. So that's our wondrous capacity for morality. Ninth is our wondrous capacity for love. I think our alien friend, as they observed us, would see this capacity as something which would astound them. This is the one that really moves us beyond being a biological species, being Homo sapiens. Because it's in our capacity to love that we move into the realm of the intersubjective, person to person. And love doesn't work on the basis of the survival of the fittest. In fact, love works essentially in vulnerability. It's only in making ourselves vulnerable to another person that love is possible. It's so against the Darwinian account. This is a well-known passage from Lewis, and he gets to the heart of it. To love at all, he says, is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrong and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in a casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. And that's why it goes against the Darwinian survival of the fittest narrative. Now, there are different kinds of human love, all of them requiring this kind of vulnerability. Love is eros, or we might say romantic attachment is one love, and this is a mighty one. When this one hits our inner life for another, it dissolves our ego boundaries. We fall in love. And when it possesses us, we become so absorbed in the other. Appetite flees, we can hardly sleep. And neuroscientists can actually identify the areas of the brain where this happens, the ones that govern our sexual desire, primarily the hypothalamus. And you can see the intoxicants of romantic love and the endorphins and cortisols that it releases. Neuroscience also says that this all ebbs away naturally. We have it for 3-year maximum and then it goes. Now, you're unlikely to move your lover by telling them, Hey, Hans, the cortisol levels are good for the moment, and if lucky, we should have a few more years out of them. I'd say far better, read a love sonnet of Shakespeare to them, or just go watch a good rom-com. We're capable of eros. The other kind of love is self-giving, the giving of ourselves to another. The Bible frequently says, love your neighbor as yourself. It's a call for other-centeredness, the kind of love that contributes to the enlargement and blessing of the other, even at personal cost, even to the point of sacrifice. It's even what strangers will do for others. They'll go into the burning house and try to save a person, or jump into the dangerous river. As one naturalist quipped, finding center in the world of another is a colossal achievement. I love that he acknowledges this. It makes no sense within a purely materialist universe. And this is the point. As selfish as we can be, it actually looks like we're designed for this kind of love. And we're capable of these kinds of acts of kindness, these acts of self-giving. In The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky expresses this in a negative form. He asks, what is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love, because it's against what we were made for. So loving others is what life is for. And that's because we've been placed in the world as lovers. And that means we're meant to find our center in the worlds of others and to give to them. Now, when the alien asks us, why do you function like that? What would we say to them? Well, within the hardware account, there isn't much to say. As David Richard Preck puts it, biologists are right to shrug their shoulders or knit their brows when asked to address the issue of love, because the term love is not defined in biology. The software account doesn't offer much either. It tends to skirt the term love and restrict it to the matter of sexuality and attraction. What interests me is that Christianity doesn't in any way skirt the issue or shrug the shoulder. As Augustine put it, God has placed us as humans in this universe as lovers. And why has he done that? Augustine asked, because he himself is love. So the Christian account begins and ends in love and gives so much attention to it. And that's why with this kind of understanding, you would talk to the alien for hours about this wondrous capacity. And then finally, our wondrous capacity for religion. Now, I understand this is an incredibly controversial statement to make today. There's a huge amount of antipathy to religion. Think about what's going on in France at the moment, and certain sympathy to the problem religion causes. Nietzsche asked the question a century or more ago, is man merely a mistake of God's, or God merely a mistake of man? And I think the consensus is very much for the second of those questions. God is the mistake of man, perhaps our biggest mistake. And our best hope, it's thought, is to get beyond this religious capacity. Now that, of course, is wishful thinking, because our race, our human race, is deeply religious. We always have been, and I'll say we always will be. Historically, as the historian Christopher Dawson argued, religion is the key to history. It's the key to history. Back in the 1960s, the secularists were making prophecies about what they called the naked public square. And the naked bit was shorn of religion. Now, today we're further away from that than ever. Religion is here to stay. And France, after these atrocities the last few weeks, are discovering that it's not going to go away. So what are they going to do about it? Now, as an alien look back on human history, I think they could see with Dawson that it's the greatest force in history. And it's been a force for great good and great evil. Religion has been the inspiration for so much of the great art. Some would argue without religion, there is no art. And we have so much in Europe where we live. It's responsible for the construction of cathedrals. There's Lincoln, one of my favorites. But it's also at the same time inspired some of the bloodiest wars in history. And it's also responsible for buildings like that. That's the Cube, the La Grande Arch in Paris. I mean, it's intriguing. and attractive perhaps in its own way, but I'm going to go for that one right there. I'll leave it to you to choose. But religious force. Now, where does religion come from? Well, Marx, of course, explained it in social terms. It's an opiate for our miserable lives. Some biologists see it as a Darwinian device for survival. E.O. Wilson said faith is biologically understandable as a Darwinian device for survival and increased reproduction. It is forged by the success of the tribe. The tribe is united by it when competing with other tribes, and it can be a key to success within the tribe for those members most effective in manipulating the faith to gain internal support. Wow. Now, I find both of those explanations rather unconvincing. And I would suggest an alien would argue that religion, this capacity, arises out of an awareness of our human limits. Here we are, conscious beings, as we saw last week, and part of consciousness is an awareness of death and of suffering, the horror of human suffering, and in all of this, of our human vulnerability. We are conscious of our limits. And out of this awareness of limit, we naturally look to something or someone that transcends these limits. We need someone or something we can put our trust in to bring order out of the confusion, out of the horror. So it's like we're designed for this kind of trust in that which transcends our limits. And having this capacity then orients us to what we think is worthy of our trust. Now, the aim of our trust can be many different things. It can be said in what I call sacred terms or in profane terms. So in former times, religious trust was exclusively sacred. It was oriented to the gods, or for much of Europe's history, to Christ, the center of Christianity. Sacred trust. In the modern period, religious trust has had a very different focus. The sacred has been removed and something else is being put in its place. So something like political ideology, for me, functions as that thing which transcends our limits. So we put our trust that in the implementation, say, of socialism, order will come. We do this with money today. There's a certain enchantment to money, a wonderful book called The Enchantment of Mammon that argues this case. We can put our trust in all kinds of things, either sacred or profane. And I would argue that this religious capacity we have is an inference that we're designed for sacred trust, and one that's not of this world. We have this capacity because we were made to trust God, Jesus Christ. C.S. Lewis said, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Or as Augustine famously put it, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless. That's the religious side coming in, until they find their rest in you, and that rest is trust. So there it is, a portrait, a bare portrait of a human in terms of our faculties and capacities. And I would suggest it's a portrait that enchants us. These are wondrous things. And as God declares in his anthropology about us, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. That's a line from Psalm 8. And I think all the evidence points very strongly in that direction. Good, thank you. That went on a long time, I know. There was a lot of ground to cover, but thank you for listening. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks so much, Andrew. We're going to move now to an intermission. Just before we do, I would just like to point out again that the Q&A tab is at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free in the next 5 minutes as we take this break to formulate some questions. Alternatively, you can wait until we're back and then raise your hand, and I can hand you the mic, as it were, and we'll be able to hear you. You should be able to do that by clicking on your name. We'll be back in 5 minutes. That makes 8:34 by my reckoning. So feel free to give the fire a little stir, pour yourself another shandy, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. So I make it 8:34. We'll go straight to Q&A. And I'll try and mix it up. I'll try and keep an eye on those who are raising hands, who'd like to contribute verbally, and those who have typed an answer in as well. First off the bat, Matt Peckham. Hi, Andrew. Thanks so much for this evening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where imagination fits in. Is it a capacity amongst the others, or a faculty that enables these capacities you've spoken about, or something else?
Thank you, Matt. Lovely to have contact with you. This is your field, so I wish you were speaking to it. I know the work you've done on it. Yeah, I think you would have heard in our wondrous capacity for beauty, I included human imagination as part of that. In a sense, I think it's the imagination that enables us to see the beauty around us, as Rumi said, that surrounds us. But it's also human imagination that allows us to create something ourselves. So yeah, faculty, capacity, I'm using those really synonymously. I think there probably is a distinction between them, but I would just generally put it in imagination fits into our capacity for beauty. But all of these things are a unity. One can't think well in terms of abstraction and theory without the imagination, something Einstein realized that he had to imagine himself into some of his great work. It's an excellent question. Thank you.
James Goodwin Hudson highlights a quote from Thomas Cranmer, who said that what the heart wants, the mind justifies, and the will enacts. And the question is, I think he is saying we're driven by what we love. Is this view too simplistic or reductionistic?
Excellent question. It's interesting when it comes to what I called our capacity for action. It really is the fox in the hen house. It creates so much chaos in terms of, does action, will, choice root itself in instinct, in feeling, in reason? And there's sort of a fight to see which gives rise to the other. And in a sense, the portrait I'm trying to portray is that we have this range of capacities that function interdependently, and we don't have to put the stress on one to the negation of the other. But I'm not familiar with that Cranmer quote. I'd love to pick that up. And I think Augustine would agree with Cranmer's emphasis on love, as yeah. In a sense, we are defined by our loves. And in terms of my, if I can call it a hierarchy, this list, love, as you saw, was very near the top. Thank you.
I've got a question here from Elaine Cooper, who thanks you for a great talk and says, with the postmodern undermining of language, meaning, rationality, do you feel this could contribute to a conscience-free society and loss of human capacity?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Elaine. Excellent question. I mean, it's gone a little bit off the boil, but I found in the mid-90s the emphasis on the indeterminacy of language, its ultimate meaninglessness because it's just one layer of symbol on top of the other, not connecting to anything. I used to sit in these discussions with people who believe this and feel so distressed, partly because the discussion we were having was full of language, which was making sense of things. But I actually feel that there's a Confucius said that our lives are diminished by our capacity for language, as our language use deteriorates, so does our humanity. And I think it's that fundamental to who and what we are. And in terms of the bottom and so much coming out of that, I put great stress on it. So I think, yeah, I think Wittgenstein, we're limited by our language. As our language use deteriorates, it has a deep impact on our inner life. I was on a train years ago listening to some people talk, and I started writing down some of the sentences I heard, and it was remarkable for me how one sentence could have a couple of F words in it. And I thought, that's just the diminishment of language. You could have found an adverb for that or an adjective for that. So I am concerned today about the diminishment of our ability to use language well.
Please do feel free to register any more questions that come about, even through the progress of this discussion. I found, there's a question from Ronald in the chat. If religion has returned to the naked square, to the surprise of the skeptics from the 1960s, where do you think that is going? And is that necessarily good?
Wow. Yep. There's a lot there. Thank you, Ronald. I mean, the first thing we'd want to point out is that the naked public square, as in a public square that has no religion, is itself a very repressive kind of public square. We saw that with communism. Albania boasting on being the first religionless country in the world, but with a repression in terms of human freedom, which is utterly staggering. So in that sense, the naked public square itself was always doomed to failure, partly because this capacity is in us. My view is that the public square needs to become a civil public square, and that's something which doesn't seem to be happening in Europe at the moment. So there are reasons to be alarmed by the return of certain kinds of religion that aren't being civil. And for me, this is where the play between religious institutions and state institutions need to be well thought through. I think at the end of the day, there is a rule of law that needs to govern the religious life of citizens. If there's a point where there's a real conflict there, well, that can be raised. So at one level, I would say I want to see it come back. I want to see it have a key role in our public square, but it needs to be done in a civil manner. In terms of the future, I fear that it won't be done in a civil manner, and it will make the place of religion in secular society even more problematic.
I'm going to get a cheeky question in here now, Andrew. Do you see something of a paradox between sort of an unbridled, overweening confidence in, humanity, exemplified maybe by the Elon Musks of this world, and also, you pointed last time, the time before, to a view of humanity that really sees us as glorified dust, or perhaps not even glorified, an embarrassment of a species. Seems that there's a paradox in our present cultural moment between the two of those. What do you make of that? Where does that come from? How would you address that?
Yep. This will be the topic I'm going to devote my attention to further down the line in this series. I think it's the seventh lecture, because we have to account for the brokenness, dare I say it, the wickedness of humans, the evidence for which is very great. So I'm not at all backing off that side of our human existence and how this reflects itself in the world. But I think I'm starting off where I am with this ennobling, this enchantment, which I think really does belong to us, because I think it's that which really makes sense of the other side of us. So that's where we need to begin the stress. I often say to preachers and pastors that TV dramas today are doing an excellent job in terms of the expose of human brokenness and wickedness. You can watch some TV dramas and there's not a single redeemable trait in any of the characters. They're liars, cheats, and you're sort of looking for the other side. So I think today in the cultural air, there is this pessimism that really comes through. And I believe it's the ennobling of what we are and seeing that actually makes much more sense of our brokenness. But that's the subject of a later talk and lecture.
Mm-hmm. Just a last opportunity now for any last minute questions or comments that you have that you may have at the end of this session. Again, you can raise your hand if you want to contribute verbally. We hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.
Very well.